Good morning, everybody. As we start to look out into passing through the waters, or crossing the water, I would ask you just to maybe start in your Bibles this morning in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 9. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, as this begins, Moses is talking to the people. He's getting ready to give them the law, a lot of the descriptions, everything that's going to be taking place. He's going to give them a very simple statement, but it's very profound. He says, I want you to take heed for yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things which your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from all your heart for all the days of your lives. And I want you to teach them to your children and to your grandchildren. As we think about this idea of crossing through the water, this isn't a story for the immature. This isn't something for the naive. This isn't something for children. This story was meant for us, each and every one of us that was here. Sometimes you hear the word in the Bible, it's called an antitype. And very much so, this is an antitype for us. So before we speak about the water, I thought we should talk a little bit about the world. You see, God's people were living in a world that they were born into. God's people had friends. They had families. God's people had jobs. God's people had duties. God's people were living in a world that didn't understand them. God's people was living in a world, they were living in a world where there were different faiths. God's people were living in a world where the culture didn't understand them. And God's people were living in a world where they had forgotten their purpose. You'll see some of that confusion early on. But God told that world, let my people go. Now Jason, our brother Jason made a comment a long time ago. It's always stuck with me, so I always look for these little things in the Bible now. Every single word in the Bible has a purpose. It has a meaning. None of this was throwaway. So when God told the world, let my people go, and He starts putting the world through a series of things. Why didn't He choose a spider? Hate spiders. Why didn't He choose a scorpion that could go into your sock? Why didn't He choose a lion that was powerful? Or a snake that was sneaky? Or a leopard that was fast? Why didn't He choose those things? Because God wasn't trying to choose those things just to scare people. What was God doing? God was going to destroy the world. Everything the world thought they had. It began with water to blood. Apis and Isis and Osiris. That was all about the Nile. That's why the Nile was turned to blood. The Egyptians had faith in gods in those things. They trusted in gods in those things. Why frogs? Why frogs? The god Hecate. That was the goddess of birth. That was another god that Israel trusted in. Why gnats? That was the symbol of the god Set. He was the god of the desert. Why flies? Uatchet. He was the god of the flies. Why the livestock? Because you had Hathor and Apis. Hathor and Apis, they were the gods of livestock for the Egyptians. Why boils? Because Sakhet, Sunu, and Isis were the gods of health and the gods of disease. You see, with each and every one of these, God is crushing everything that they placed their trust in. Everything that they thought that made Egypt special. Everything that the world thought made Egypt a prominent place. A place that the world wanted to be. But He didn't stop there. Why hail? Because Nut and Osiris were the gods and the goddesses of sky, crops, and fertility. He utterly destroyed those gods too. When it came to locusts, it was round 2 for our friends Nut, Osiris, and Set. They had to just be really ground into the dust. to make the point really clear. Why darkness? Ra. Most of us know Ra. He was the god of the sun. Why the death of the firstborn? Because the Pharaoh claimed he was the one who controlled all life. You see, God utterly destroyed that world. And when he was finished destroying everything that this world trusted in, everything power this world thought it had, everything they thought it could be, everything they thought they had, everything they thought they trusted in, they were left broken, they were left destitute, and they were left crushed. And God's people were free. In crushing that world, God went before them first. First and foremost, by day and by night, God is going to lead his people. God is going to protect them. I would ask you to look in your Bibles, going backwards in your Bibles, and we'll spend the rest of our time, generally speaking, in Exodus chapter 14. Actually, we're going to start in Exodus chapter 13, verse 21. In Exodus 13, verse 21, he says, "And the Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud to lead them by the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light by the night, so as they could go by day and by night." God was giving them a path to follow. He led the way. All they had to do was just simply follow him. And he did not take away, in verse 22, the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. God's protection, God's guidance on the way out would never, ever, ever leave them. Never. Whether you had your eyes closed during the day or closed at night, God was there guiding you. And this path was a part of God's plan. That path was easy. In those early days of following God, and I want you to think about this as ourselves as well. In those early days of following God, everything was easy. Everything was good. You were going to a promised land. You had plundered the Egyptians. You had everything with you. There was no pressure. There was no problems. There weren't anything like that. You were just simply following God. How could you not but feel peaceful and good? But you see, it's very similar to us. But the world wanted them. In chapter 14 and verse 5, "Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of the Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people, and said, 'Why have we done this? Why have we let Israel go from serving us?'" Have you ever thought about what that freedom meant? God's people being free. Have you ever thought about what that meant to the world? Okay, because at this time, Egypt again was the world. That freedom meant that there was a acknowledged ruler in the world. But that ruler was not Pharaoh. That ruler was in charge of their world. And that ruler was not Pharaoh. Pharaoh had no power at all. Pharaoh had nothing. And because that world was threatened, and the ruler of that world was threatened, something needed to happen. The freedom of God's people had to be hidden. The freedom of God's people had to be denied. The freedom of God's people had to be diminished. The freedom of God's people had to be destroyed. God's people would have to deny who they were. God's people would not have to take this journey seriously. God's people would not want to tell their friends and family about who really ruled the world. In fact, what the world wanted them to know is that there was no God, except the one they told you was there. Because their God wants you to go back living without a seared conscience, so that the world who knew the truth could deny the truth. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4 Satan, the god of this world, has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. So the world came after them. The world came after them. Chapter 14 and verse 7, it's a simple verse, but it says, "And he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every single one of them." What was coming after them? Sometimes we read that and it's just sort of a sentence. But there's more than a sentence that was coming after God's people. What was coming after God's people was an army. What was coming after God's people was a technology. What was coming after God's people was nobility. What was coming after God's people was every person who had station in life. What was coming after God's people were God's people understanding and being fearful. What was coming after God's people was remembering who they were before they followed God. Everything was coming after God's people. Their past was coming back to haunt them. Have you ever thought about that? Chapter 14, verses 8 and 9, it says, "And the Lord hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. And the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses, all the chariots, the Pharaoh, his horsemen, his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea of Pi-hahiroth." I'll never get that right. Or Baal-zephon. I think I got that one partially right. So God's people ran into a problem there. If you look down just a little bit below that, verse 11, God's people start to get a little bit worried, a little bit upset, because there was a problem on the path to the promised land. And it wasn't something they expected. And because the path wasn't smooth and easy, they worried. You'll see there in verse 11. They complained. And at the end, they have to be comforted. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 2, a little thought for ourselves. It says, "Think about the things in heaven and not the things of earth." But what we see here is that God stood between the world and his people. Verse 19, "And the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved, and he went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went before them and stood behind them." In Psalm chapter 34 and verse 17, we're told, "When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all of their trouble." And when God stood there to protect his people, what you'll find there is the world was confused. The world thought they were in charge. The world thought they were powerful. But the world would not relent. We'll see a little bit later, the world is going to try to find a way to get to God's people. But you see, God opened up a way to the promised land. He opened up a way through the water. The world offered slavery or death. The world thought they were in control. But the world did not know that God had a plan and that God was in control. And just like Jason talked a little bit about this morning, if you sort of picture that image in your mind, in the background, maybe on a hillside, is a massive army. Then you have a cloud. Then you have yourselves. Then you have water. What would you do? Verse 13, get a little insight into that. Moses says to the people, "Don't be afraid, stand still, and you will see the salvation of the Lord. He will accomplish it for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, they shall see again no more forever." In verse 14, he's going to tell them a little bit more. "The Lord will fight for you, and you will hold your peace." God's going to fight. You're going to have your peace, and God is going to do the fighting for you. And if you think about that, you think, do you see it? Do you see what's going to happen? Now, the waters haven't parted just yet. But do you see already that God is fighting for you? Do you see God there in your life? Do you see God everywhere? He is already stopping the world from doing what the world wants to you. And then what we see is the path that for us, if I'm standing there and I've got the water, what are you thinking? What am I thinking? I hear you, Moses, but I see water right there. And the only way out of this trouble is complex. It's difficult. Do I swim the water? Do I climb the mountain? Do I dig a hole? What do I do to get away from this trouble? What they're going to find is it was already there. Verse 21. So Moses stretches out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back, and a strong east wind blew all that night and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. All you have to do is go through the water. When you go through that water, you will leave the world behind. And when you leave that world behind, you say, well, isn't there more? Isn't there something complex? Isn't there something mighty? We sort of see this in 2 Kings with Naaman, don't we? Naaman says, that's so simple. Just go through the water. I mean, look at my life. Look at all the different things I've done. Look at all the problems I've had. Look at my. Do you know who I am? Go through the water. That's what he tells them. You don't have to do anything mighty. You don't have to do anything miraculous. Just go through the water. Just wash and be clean. If you think about that, all you have to do is take a step. You just have to step down into that. You look there in verse 22. It says, so the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The monsters, could you picture like what sort of monsters you might see? That's all one of the things I've always thought about. I've caught some pretty big catfish. I can only just picture like what a big fish at the bottom would look like. But you picture, my job was to walk through the water. My job wasn't to look to the left and say, ooh, that's scary. Hope I don't run into him. You're not. I don't have to look to my right and say, ooh, that's ferocious. My job was to basically walk through the water. Joshua is going to tell them a little bit later on in chapter 1, verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong, be courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And if you think about that, as you're walking through this path, I mean, this is a long path, right? This is a long path that they're going down. You ever thought about this? The path ahead may not be completely visible to them. You think about that? I've often thought about that as like this short-term thing, right? I step down in the water, ooh, that's cool, and I'm out. That's not the point. The point is this is a really long path, and I don't see the end of it right now. But the path is on dry ground. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11 says, know the plans for I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and plans to give you a future. And the only way the world can get you is if you turn back to it. That's the only way that the world can get to you. In chapter 14, verse 23, the Egyptians pursued them and went after them into the midst of the sea, all the Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. You know what's amazing? Because I think we have been told, as you think about God's people going down and they're starting that journey, you don't read of a single person who stopped and turned around and said, I want to go back. You don't see that. No one said it because none of them were taken out of God's hand. Those were God's people. In John chapter 10, verse 29, it says, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. He's going to repeat this a little bit later on, as Peter will, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 17. Therefore, beloved, know this beforehand, be on your guard, so that you are not carried away by the error of unprincipled men, and you fall away because of your own steadfastness. You can't be snatched out of God's hand, but you can walk away. You can lose your steadfastness. You can turn around and walk right back to those Egyptians. The world tried to find their own way, though. The world fought. And what we'll see here just a little bit as we get sort of towards the end here of chapter 14, they wanted to make their own way to God's people. And they were going to do anything to it. And God knew what they were doing. Verse 24, it says, "Now it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord," think about this, "the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians, and through the pillar of the fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians." God knew everything these Egyptians were doing. He knew everything they were going to try. He knew everything that they were going to try to do to get God's people. In verse 25, you see, he starts to intervene. He helps here and there. Now, maybe the Israelites didn't know it at the time. But you step back and look. How did that wheel on the chariot suddenly pop off? Right? He took off the wheels of the chariots. It drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for God fights on their behalf." John chapter 10, verse 9, he says, "I am the gate, and whoever wants to enter or enters through me will be saved. They will come and go and find good pleasure or good pasture." And as they're continuing this journey, God's people start to come up out of the water. Come up out of that ground. Have you ever thought about what that would look like? And have you ever thought about what it looks like for you? I thought about this as I was putting this together. When you came up out of that valley, up out of that water, and you get up here on this dry ground, there should be some wisdom there. Because if I turned around, what was I going to see behind me? One thing I'm going to know is that God saved me. He saved me. I didn't have hope. I'm done. Egyptians coming. I was also going to know that the world wanted to destroy me. You ever thought about that? That the world wants to destroy you? I would have known that God was my only hope. And then you think, what would that cause you to do? God saved me. The world wanted to destroy me. And he was my only hope and my salvation. In Acts chapter 4 and verse 12 it says, "Nor is there any salvation in any other, for there is no name named under heaven among which men may be saved." That's how Peter and John answered when they were put to the question. A little bit later they say, "We can't but speak of the things which we have seen and heard." And if you had walked on that journey and you would see God and you'd see the fire and you'd see the clouds and you'd see the sea opened up and you'd see all those things to your left and you see all those things to your right, I mean, what else could you do but tell someone? And that's what they were told to do back in Deuteronomy. Tell your children of the things that you have seen. Now, there's a little bit more that we see. Verse 26, "When the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and their chariots and on their horsemen.'" You see, when God's people had crossed, that way was closed. The world couldn't save themselves. All of the wise were destroyed. All of the wealthy were destroyed. All the nobility was destroyed. All of the power was destroyed. Everything was sheerly, completely, and utterly destroyed. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, "For God chose the foolish things of this world to put to shame the wise, and he chose the weak things of this world to put to shame the mighty." The world never knew that the end was near. You ever think about that? The world never knew that the end was near. And Matthew chapter 24 and verse 26 says, "No one knows the hour in which the Lord will come." And you don't get a second chance. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27, "We are destined to die once and then the judgment." And what you see here in that whole conflict between the world and God is that there was no power in this entire world that was going to stop the outcome that God had foreordained. God's people would be saved. and death and destruction was going to collapse on that world. Chapter 14, verses 19 through 21, or chapter 14, verses 29 through 31. The children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall on their left and right hand. And the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So all the people feared the Lord, and believed the Lord, and served Moses. The world had no place in God's promised land. They weren't going to get in. Chapter 15, in chapter 15, what we see is that God's people rejoiced. Sort of the Song of Moses that we sing about. That Song of Moses kind of begins here in chapter 15, but I ask you just take a look a little bit kind of towards the middle of that chapter in verses 11. It says, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, O glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? You stretched out your hand, the earth swallowed them. You in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength into your holy habitation." And if you think about, they are singing and they are rejoicing. When you're sitting up there on that flat ground of the promised land, and you turn around, and you sort of see the picture, the waves start to crush. They start to come down. You know, one thing I could probably get an idea that I could see at that point in time. I could see that I was up here, but I could also see that before the way closed on all of them, there were other people still on the journey. I could see their fear. I could see their concern. I could see their wavering. And for us who are a little bit older, for those who are younger, that's called wisdom. And we have to share that wisdom. Don't waver. Just keep walking. I know sometimes it may look like that water is going to splash down on you and you go, oh, don't worry. Just keep walking. Don't turn around. Don't look to the left and don't look to the right. And if you think about those people, I would close with this thought. What will you do with those words of wisdom? This isn't just a story for kids. And it's not something that hopefully we check a disinterested box on. This is a powerful story for us. Now, the world will try to tell us that this is naive. The world will tell us it's foolish. The world will tell us all sorts of stories and ways that this could possibly happen, any way than other than exactly the way that you just heard it read. And that's the same world chasing after us today that was chasing after them 2,000 years ago. Don't tell your kids. Don't believe it's true. Become a slave. Deny God. And the question is, will you follow it? Will you follow the world? Will you keep your eyes focused on God? Will you teach it? Will you tell people that your life has changed? Will you show people that your life is changed? Will you show people in your home your life is changed? Will you show people the way you talk that your life is changed? Will you show it to your children that your life has changed? Will you show it to the people that you meet that your life has changed? You have been delivered by God through the water. And that is just a powerful, powerful message for us.